Hey everybody. So we just finished up our unit 1A called data displays. And so 1B is the next unit and it's actually called the measures of center and spread. So this quick PowerPoint is just going to go over the measures of center. So things like mean, median, and mode. These words should sound familiar. We've heard these hopefully in middle school. So this class is just going to go into a little bit more depth in each of them. But again, words we've already heard and used before. So the expectation here is that you have your notebook out and that you're taking down the definitions and the examples and kind of doing the note-taking process at home. All right, here we go. Measures of center. So again, just measures of center. So what do we mean when we say a measure of center? So it's used to represent like a typical value in a data set. So if I look at a data set of 50 numbers and I want to like categorize the data set, they're mostly around blank number. That would be a measure of center. So I'm trying to represent a data set, like maybe a ton of numbers with one typical value. So the definition of center is, again, trying to represent a full data set. So a data set with a bunch of numbers, picture. Imagine like a list of 100 numbers, and you're trying to pick one that best describes it. That's what we're calling a measure of center. Okay, so our first definition here is just simply being what we mean by a measure of center, and that is trying to capture a whole set of data with just one number. So pause if you need more time on this slide. I'm going to move on. Okay. The first word of measure of center is the mean, okay? It's the average. The mean, the average, they're synonyms, words we've all heard before, okay? The symbol that we use for the mean is like this fancy X, this italicized X, and it has a bar over it, so we pronounce that X bar. So the symbol we use for the mean is X bar. How do we find a mean? Well, we add up all the numbers and then divide by how many numbers there are in the data set. Okay, this is very review information here. And I even put a data set, we're going to practice this, okay? Finding a mean. We add all the numbers up, and then we divide by however many numbers are in our list. And that's how we find the average of something. Here's my data set. I'm going to add all these numbers up. Boom. I want to divide by 10 because there's 10 numbers. I have my little X bar symbol over here. We're calculating the mean, we're calculating the average. They add up to 110, and I know 110 divided by 10 gives me an average of 11. Okay, so I just kind of walked us through a very straightforward example of finding an average from a list of 10 numbers. Here's were 10 numbers. They ranged from 4 all the way up to 18. Yep. And the average of them is 11. Okay, so the measure of center I would use to capture this list of 10 numbers, I would say the average is 11 here. Okay, first example, mean, average, synonyms. Here's another example you can try on your own, so I would pause me right now and try this one. So it says, here is how long someone spent on FaceTime in the last week. Find the average number of minutes they spent on FaceTime. So we have Sunday through Saturday. Here's the minutes they spent on FaceTime. It's a lot per day, I guess, in a week. So pause me right now, add all the numbers up, divide it by 7, and there's your average. You should get an average of, X bar should be 93.86, so about 94 minutes this person spent on average on FaceTime in a week. That's a lot of minutes. They had a lot of people to talk to. Okay, finding averages. Again, we should feel comfortable with this. We'll practice it more when we're in class, but again, a basic skill we need to have. All right, here we go. This might be new, but again, we might have previewed this in our in-person day when we were talking about our grade calculations and like what a weighted average actually means in regards to like our grade book and how the grade book is set up. So a weighted mean is just when the numbers have a weight attached to them. So the steps to find the weighted mean, you would basically determine the weight. So like what is the weight of this value, multiply that, and then add them together. So instead of just finding the average like normal from the 10 numbers, for example, in example 1, now each of these 10 numbers has maybe a weight, and you need to account for that. So what you do is you take the data point, you multiply it by the weight, you take the next data point, you multiply it by that weight, and you kind of go through that whole process, and then you add them all together in the end, and that's how we find a weighted mean or a weighted average. Okay, so have these steps in our notes. A weighted average in the next slide, we're actually going to do an example. And it goes with the averages set up in my class. So it says, in Miss Sarah's math class, your grades are weighted by the following. Again, we went over all this, right? 50% formative, 30% summative, and 20% participation gives us 100% of our grade. I spent like 5 minutes talking about this in each class. And so let's say this particular student has a formative grade of 84, we're looking right here now, a summative grade of 75, and a participation grade of 95. Maybe they're really good effort-wise, but they struggle test taking. That's kind of what I'm seeing here based on this grade, okay? And so the question is, what is their overall grade for quarter one? I'm kind of blocking there, okay? What is the overall grade for quarter one? And so we need to use weighted averages because formative is weighted differently than summative is weighted differently than participation, right? So how do we solve this thing? Well, you take each data point and you multiply it by the weight. So 84 is my first data point, and it has a weight of 50%. Okay, when I multiply percents, I'm going to change this into a decimal. I move the decimal point 2 places to the right. I know that 50% is really just the decimal 0.5. So my first step would be to multiply the data point of 84 by its corresponding weight, which is 50% because it's a formative grade. Add that to the next data point. And I typed this all out actually, so I'm just going to show it in a second. But you would kind of just go through those steps with each data point. So 84 times 0.5 plus 75 times 0.3, because remember the weights are different for summative versus formative. And then 95 times 0.2 gives me a quarter one grade overall of an 83.5% for quarter one. Based on my grades and based on the averages that the grades are weighted as, that's my overall average for quarter one. Okay, that's how we would use weighted averages, for example. I think that's a pretty relevant example. We're always curious about what our grades are and why they're like that, so hopefully it's relevant for you. Okay, moving on. We cover averages, we cover weighted averages. The median, okay, the middle number. So when finding the median, it can either be done when you have a list of an odd number of numbers or an even number of numbers. And what I mean, like in this data set, there's 9 data points. So this is an odd set of data just because there's 9 data points. And so when you have an odd set of data, the middle number is going to jump out to us. And what I mean by that is if you put remember to put the numbers in order when we find the median. And when so say we like do this method, right, of crossing off one on the left, then we cross off one on the right. And pretty soon we get down to the middle, the median is going to be left, okay? My median is 5. And so when an odd set of numbers, the median is going to jump out. There won't be any calculation needed. It's just the middle number is 5. So here my median is 5. And that's when you have an odd set of numbers, so the middle number. When you have an even set of numbers, so here I have 3, 6, I have, 10 numbers instead of 9. First step would be to put them in order. Boom, they're in order. And now when I go through and like kind of do the crossing off method, I animated it, so here we go. You kind of cross off, oh, I guess I didn't. You're left with 2 numbers, not like 5 in my previous example. And so the median falls in between this 9 and 11. And you're probably like, oh, well, I know what number's in between 9 and 11, it's 10. But if it was something like that you didn't obviously know that right off the bat, you would have to average the 2. So if you're unsure of what's in between 9 and 11, you can find that by averaging them. And so we just learned what an average is. You add them up and you divide by how many you have. So 9 plus 11 divided by 2 gives me 10, which I already knew was my median. Okay, so just an extra step when you have an even set of data that you have to do. You have to take an average at the end or find the number that's in the middle of the 2 that you're left with. The mode. The mode of a data set is the number that appears the most, okay? It's the most common. We've heard of this vocab word before. We can have 1 mode, 2 modes, more than 2 modes. Again, we've heard these: unimodal, bimodal, multimodal. Here's the data set. Here's my example, okay? We need to find the mode. What number shows up the most? I see 2 8s, so the mode is 8. I'm covering it, but the mode is 8, okay? It shows up the most. I think mode is easiest to find. A good question is, can there be no mode? And so maybe pause and kind of think on this. Can a data set have no mode? So you can pause, but I will tell you the answer. Yes, if all the numbers show up just once. So if there's no numbers that are repeated, there is no mode. And an example could look like just a list of numbers where all of them show up once, so there's no mode here. Or like in this stem and leaf plot, for example, all the numbers show up once. There's no repeated leaves, at least with the same stem. So there's no mode. There can also be more than one mode if the numbers show up the same amount of times. So if like this data set had like 1 and 3, okay, well there's 2 1s and 2 3s, and they both show up twice. So the mode here would be 1 and 3. So there can be no modes, there can be 2 modes, but again, mode is the most common number. Okay, so these words should have sounded familiar. We just got a good recap on them. Hopefully they're in your notes by now. And we're going to be doing more practice with these just from data sets to start. And then we're going to start finding these things from our data displays. So back to dot plots, back to histograms, back to frequency tables. And we need to soon be able to find the mean, the median, and the mode from these displays. All right, see you soon.